I got really burnt out to the point where I quit and I actually wanted to completely change careers. I call it my quarter life crisis. I enrolled in like a art curation program and I dropped out like 2 weeks later. But it's all about learning how to combine the business side of things and also your personal creative goals. It was really hard at first to kind of get used to the idea of just doing full-time work and then not necessarily feeling creatively fulfilled.
Hey Hatchlings, welcome to the Motion Hatch podcast. I'm your host, Haley Akins. Today we're talking to illustrator and animator Irene Feleo. She's originally from Australia, but she now lives in Brooklyn, New York with her boyfriend. We discussed a bit about the importance of having your own style and aesthetic, and also how personal projects can lead you to a lot of great clients. So I hope you enjoy this episode. Hey Irene, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good, how are you?
Good, thank you.
Well, the first question I wanted to ask you is how did you get into doing illustration and animation?
Yeah, I guess I started university doing digital media in Australia, in Sydney. And it was a pretty really vague course because it was pretty new and no one really knew what it was about. So you kind of just ended up learning how to use Photoshop and like editing software and 3D software. And I guess from that point, I realized that my main interest was kind of in illustration and making the illustrations move. I always liked drawing, so I guess that was kind of like a natural progression for me. But it was only like later on when my animation skills kind of developed.
Yeah, because I really, really love your style. I just wanted to know, do you like have any advice for an illustrator and animator who feels like they have their own style to sort of get work? How did you go about getting work when you started out?
Yeah, because I've always kind of had my own style, but it always wasn't necessarily very technical. I guess when I did university, I really wanted to be a concept artist and like work, for like huge production companies like Disney and just work on like huge animation projects. But then I realized kind of along the way that I wasn't very technically talented. Like I don't have a very good eye for like life drawing or perspective or lighting or anything like that. I don't have really good rendering skills. So I guess like along the way, I just kind of kept going at it, but kind of making up for that lack of technical skill by like learning technical skill in motion. And so along the way, I just developed my own style of illustration until like my technical skills that I learned through like studio work started to inform like how I draw in real life, which was pretty cool.
So you started out as an illustrator, but you've used animation to, highlight and progress your illustrations. Is that kind of right?
Yeah, like I feel like only recently has my illustration work kind of started to get notice in the industry, just because like I've always drawn and I've always really loved it. But I definitely like to make money in the beginning from when I graduated university. I just worked as a designer at a motion graphics studio. And when I started out, I didn't even really know how to do proper character design or style frames or anything like that. So when I started working in these motion studios, and it took like 7 years really to develop kind of the level of skill that I have, like I was just about combining those two of like working in-house and like having real life advertising experience and then doing my personal work at home and just teaching myself along the way.
Yeah, that's great. You're originally from Australia, but now you're living in New York, right?
Yes, I moved here just over a year ago.
Okay, what made you want to move to New York? Was it the work or something else?
Well, me and my boyfriend always wanted to live overseas. So the original plan was actually to move to Berlin because I'd visited there before when I was at the Pictoplasma conference. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Oh, yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a character-based conference. And I actually exhibited over there as part of like the Pictoplasma Academy. So I really liked the vibe that Berlin had. There were so many illustrators and animators kind of just doing their own thing, not very commercial work, but like kind of just doing like fun experiments and artist projects. So I really actually wanted to move over there. But then We ended up visiting New York when we were visiting my family in LA. And then we thought, oh, this place is pretty cool. We should probably try and get a job here because everyone tells us that it's really hard. So the chances of us getting one are pretty like 50-50. So we may as well give it a shot. So we went here first before we were going to go to Berlin. And then we both ended up getting jobs. And we have been here ever since.
Okay, cool. That's good. Were you freelancing in Australia?
I was doing a bit of both. So I did my stint working like full time as a staff member at a small production studio called Captivate for like 3.5 years. And then after that, I was so burnt out from kind of like the work culture and just like working late nights and advertising that I kind of took a break just to kind of figure out what I wanted to do. And it was in that time that I started to do freelance projects because I kind of had to make money while I was figuring out what I was doing. And that's kind of when I realized, oh, like, you know, I really love my style of illustration, my style of doing animation. And so I kind of got a lot of freelance projects in that period when I was figuring out my life. And then, yeah, so that was really great. But then I kind of needed to like go back to work just because I was going a bit crazy working from home by myself. I go a bit stir crazy if I don't have social contact or that kind of stimulation. So I ended up getting a full-time job at another studio, but I always did freelance work when I got home or like in the evenings or on the weekends.
Yeah, because I think, you know, sometimes it's important to have like a community and things like that around you. Like I work in a studio with like another illustrator, so I think that helps. I know working from home can be hard, but then I think it can also give you kind of a lot of freedom as well if you're working remotely.
Yes, definitely. It definitely gives you freedom. But I think in terms of like my personality and what I need in order to like be productive, like it was very counterintuitive because I would end up taking like 4-hour lunch breaks and then being like really lazy because my computer was actually set up right next to my bed. And so, yeah, I would find that it was like a really unhealthy lifestyle that I was living where like I would like work really late at night and then I would, you know, spend all day just chilling out. So I think I really liked the routine that I would get when I worked full time at a studio. And yeah, like I imagine that you would get like when you have a shared space with another like working freelancer, you kind of both have to maintain that air of professionalism where you kind of are productive.
Yeah, definitely. I think it definitely helps to have people around you because when I was working at home as well, I just used to be like, oh, there's no one here. I realize I haven't left the house for 3 days, you know, so I definitely recommend if any freelancers are working at home at the moment, just to go and get a shared studio space.
Absolutely.
With some of the creatives, you know, it really helps because you just have someone coming over and look over your shoulder and you're like, what do you think of this? Or whatever, like even if it isn't directly related to what you do, you know, everyone kind of has an opinion. It does help a little bit sometimes.
When I would do like the long stints of just being by myself, like I would hear my housemates like come home from work like after a long day and I would pretend that I'm like refilling my water bottle just so that I could have a conversation with them and go outside and like talk to someone. So I was like, okay, this is like pretty dark behavior. I need to kind of step out and be part of the system again.
Yeah, definitely. So you kind of did more a media course rather than illustration. Is that right? And then you became a designer at a studio as your first job?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the media course, yeah, it was definitely just more of a, we're going to teach you how to edit and we're going to teach you Photoshop, but all creative projects, like none of them were really industry approved. Like they were just kind of like, hey, like make a fun Photoshop image doing whatever you want to do using these techniques. And then, yeah, I kind of fell into the world of design just by getting an internship like straight after uni and then being like, oh, okay, cool. I guess I'm a designer. And then kind of going from there.
So you've been developing your own style alongside working in studios full time as a designer. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. No. Yeah. Like I've always kind of done my own personal work just like on the side, just because I don't know, I guess like my personal style isn't very commercial. So like I would do like, you know, little strange character illustrations or just experiment with color and pattern. I also found that I was exhibiting, like I would be part of a lot of exhibitions as well, just to kind of be part of like the art community and do mural painting. I was kind of up for doing whatever was creative and then just still maintaining my full-time studio job just to make money, but also like learn skills along the way. So I think fusing those two of like my side projects and my hobby, I guess, was illustration. And then my actual way of making money was by working in advertising and understanding the production pipeline.
It seems like they kind of feed into each other and maybe they inform each other in a way, like your own style. You developed your skills and then what you learned being a designer, more of the animation side, and then you plugged that into your illustration stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Like I think like only now that's kind of really starting to happen where I'm really trying to apply like all my history of like learning and working in studios and trying to apply that in a business sense of like how I can push my illustration and animation work further. For example, like I'm trying to start to move more into directing for animation. I actually have like no idea what I'm doing, but I guess I'm kind of seeing like people who I look up to who are animation directors, they have their very own style. And a lot of that is made through personal work, like just short films that they've made. And so I'm kind of trying to use my technical animation skills to kind of like make my illustrations move in the way that I would like them to move so that I can move it more into that directing role.
Yeah, definitely. So you think it's important to work on personal projects and, you know, collaborative projects to kind of get work and be part of the community?
I mean, I think for people who have their own style that didn't necessarily fit a mold and they kind of have their own thing that they want to do, I think that's very important because I've definitely met other animators and creatives in my industry that are, you know, jack of all trades. They're very technically skilled. They can kind of do any style and they're amazing. Like I kind of wish that I was like that as well. But I guess for me, because I gravitate towards a very specific style and also a very specific mood, I kind of struggled in the beginning because I was like, oh, how do I fit into this advertising world when, you know, all I'm doing is just like animating like really basic logos like come on screen and it's super boring. But I found that I pushed through that frustration and lack of creativity that I felt by working on my own projects on the side. That being said, there are so many people that are incredible at doing everything. And so as a result, like they might not necessarily need to do their own personal stuff on the side because they can get that creative satisfaction from the work that they're doing every day. But because I started animating the most boring stuff in the entire world and designing PowerPoints, I kind of had to find another outlet to kind of push myself further.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, when they first get into the industry, they think it's going to be great and they can work on like just the stuff that they want to do and in their style. But sometimes that's not really realistic. So you have to kind of do that as well as progressing your own style in your spare time, really, to kind of end up getting them to merge together later on in your career.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember like being so frustrated and like bored with the stuff that I was working on, even though it was interesting, I guess, to like learn how certain things animate and advertising in general. It can be pretty bleak, but definitely to like keep my spirits up, I was like, okay, I just have to kind of do my own stuff. And then over like years, like this didn't happen overnight. Like my stuff started to kind of look at a much more finished professional level. And I was like, okay, cool. Like maybe it's time I can start making money from the stuff that I really like doing myself personally instead of just what I can technically do because I've worked full time for so long.
So how did you get those projects that was informed by your own style?
So I guess like I went through a phase of like drawing a very specific kind of look, which was, it started when I went to Berlin with my boyfriend and I kind of wanted to capture everything that we saw and everything that we did. And I really felt like we were submerged in like the whole world of travel because I'd never really traveled before. So I did like these illustrations of like me and him kind of with our heads submerged in the Berlin landscape. And then that developed into a series where I did me and him like in Berlin, in Amsterdam, in New York. Like these were just like little travel portraits that I did. And I posted them in my Behance page, like online everywhere, like on Instagram. And through that style, like I've been approached by a lot of companies and like brands to essentially apply that idea of like the portrait, like submerged in different objects to whatever project that they wanted to do. Like, for example, Coca-Cola was like a huge client of mine. I was approached by a Singapore agency called Cult 3D to apply that exact style to a campaign that they were running. So they'd already seen that I can do this. They just wanted it to be applied with like the Coke branding and like the Coke idea. So yeah, I don't know. I guess it's about like doing the work that you personally want to do, and then advertising people might go, oh, hey, like we really like this. Let's do it for our own thing.
Yeah, because I think it's really important to do the work that you enjoy and put that on your website so people can see that you do that, for you to be able to get work in that style.
Yes, absolutely. I find that from experience, convincing people, especially in advertising, some people lack imagination. So, in order to prove that you can pull something off, you need to have references to show that this concept, this execution works. You can't really go, oh, I'm going to draw this and it's going to be really whimsical and going to be a really cute illustration. Like, you kind of need to show that like proof of concept. So I think by doing this style of illustration that I was really into, because I was really interested in drawing little portraits and also like monuments and like almost like visual maps, that kind of work started to gravitate towards me because I'd already proven that I could pull it off instead of just saying that I could.
Yeah, I think that's important. So how do you get your work? Do you market yourself, or do you post a lot on social media?
I would say that social media is probably my main way that I market myself, because I'm kind of in a position like living and working in New York. My visa is very specific where I can't freelance at all. So I haven't really been able to take on any freelance project. I've only been able to take on like passion projects, which I take on for free. But that being said, I am kind of in the process of moving towards freelancing through a new visa. So I've kind of been keeping the momentum of marketing myself through mainly my Instagram and Tumblr, just because I think it's probably the most effective way for people to kind of see your work. There are so many creative and social people on Instagram. And I think for me, that's probably been the most successful way of like getting people to notice your work.
Yeah, I think Instagram is becoming like a huge platform now for illustration and animation.
Absolutely.
Is there any other places that you go to find work? How did you find your job at Spontaneous in New York?
So when we first got here to New York, we kind of hit the ground running to try and find jobs. So I pretty much just applied for every single job that was available every day. Like I would apply for like 20 to 30 jobs every day. And Spontaneous, I just found through a job post on the site Motionographer. And that's how I found it.
Oh, yeah, that's always good for finding jobs on there. Have you had any experiences in the past that you felt have helped you move along your career?
I think really being part of the community and just kind of like knowing people is a really kind of good way just to get insight and an in a lot of jobs. I don't know why this is, but a lot of the times our industry, like in my experience, has been through referral. So just, even people that I worked with in my first job still recommend me to future clients if they can't do something, or if they're like, oh, hey, do you know any illustrators or animators? People from like 7 years ago will still recommend me, which I think is pretty amazing. So I think being part of the community, never burning a bridge with a past employer is really important, because you never know, like the industry is so small, even though it is big, but it is small. I would definitely recommend just, being a generally nice person and professional, and that like referrals can definitely help you.
Yeah, definitely. I think I've, met a lot of producers in companies that I've worked in the past, and then they move around and then they call you up from another company to work there. So it's definitely a good idea to keep on side with these people. And if you have like contacts in a company, try and get their personal email addresses if they leave and stuff like that. So you can, keep in contact with each other and hopefully help each other get work and things like that.
Exactly. And it's ridiculous how much referring makes a difference. But I suppose there's so many people who are illustrators and animators, like it makes a difference to go off a good referral and if someone like trusts and believes in your work. That being said, like I also think just being part of the community is like a really good way to kind of learn more and also just gain insight into it. Like I found in Sydney, I would go to I don't know if you've heard of it, but there's like a competition called Loop de Loop. It's like a looping animation competition, and they would have like bi-monthly screenings at this bar, and I would just go and like, you know, you would be amazed at how many different people, like, because I'm kind of a huge fanatic of all animators and illustrators, so I do a lot of stalking, and so I would, you know, run into people that I really admire, and then I'd get to talk to them, and I don't know, I just feel like building that sense of community and meeting people that you know of through social media is kind of like a really nice way as well to kind of feel like you're part of it.
So do you mostly chat to people on Twitter, or is there anywhere else?
I do sometimes. I mainly reblog on Twitter or retweet. I'm really bad at Twitter actually, but I mainly retweet stuff that I think is really nice. And then, yeah, I mainly just talk to people via Instagram. Like now that there's the whole stories function, you know, if an animator I admire like posts like work in progress in their stories, like I'll be like, oh, hey, that's really cool. Like I love what you're working on. And that usually opens up a dialogue, which, you know, I'm not doing it for like business purposes. It's just kind of nice to like reach out and be like, hey, I really admire your work. Keep it up.
Yeah, I think it's really good to support each other and, you know, using those new features and stuff on Instagram, like stories and things like that to post work in progress, I think is a really cool idea. Like obviously you've got Dribble as well, but a lot of stuff on there I think is becoming less work in progress and more finished.
Yeah, Dribble is definitely finished work.
I saw that you did a teaser for Project Girl. Do you want to tell us a bit about that project and how you got involved?
Oh yeah, sure. So I'm part of like a Facebook group called Australians in New York. It's just kind of like a Facebook group that's like, oh hey, like, you know, you've migrated. Here are some things to help you navigate through. And on there, I saw a post about a new film project that these girls were putting together, and they needed artwork for like a fundraising exhibition that they were going to put together. So I was like, oh, okay, cool. Like I'll apply for that. And through that process, I met the team behind Project Girl, and they're just like this awesome group of ladies that are like, you know, making 10 short films with all scripts written and directed, stories from girlhood and like just stories from, you know, various sources of being a girl. So as part of that process, like I kind of saw an opportunity because I've been really wanting to take on directing and also taking on my own projects. I kind of approached them with the idea of maybe adding an animation teaser into the mix that they could feature on their website. And Connie and Kate, who's the director and producer of the project, they were more than happy for me to explore it. I put together a treatment to kind of like say what this would look like. And yeah, luckily they approved it. So I animated it and it was really well received, which was I was really stoked about that because I didn't really know if it would fit into their world. But yeah, that's kind of how I got involved in that.
Yeah, it seems like a really cool project. I think we'll definitely put a link in the show notes to that.
Yeah, like from doing that, I've gotten like a lot of really good response just from like other animators and people who were like, oh, I didn't realize you animated. Like, that's cool. So yeah, like putting myself out there was really great. And as a result, like they've asked me to do like a special edition of one of their episodes, but like completely animated. So it's going to be like a 2-minute animation that kind of was born from me just doing the original teaser. So I'm pretty happy about that.
That's really cool. I think it's really nice to do projects, you know, even if they're on the side, that's sort of going to have a positive impact on the world, you know, putting people's stories out there that are maybe not always spoken about it's just quite a cool project.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's definitely been like one of the nicest things about it is like working with like a script and like a story that has like a really cool sentiment to it. And it's not necessarily like pushing an agenda like advertising tends to do, which is totally fine. I'm fine with that. But yeah, it's really refreshing to kind of work with something completely new.
Definitely. I think we have to try and, you know, position ourselves in our work and careers so we can seek out those projects that have more of a positive impact on the world.
Absolutely.
If you could go back in time and give yourself any advice when you started out, what would that be?
So much advice. No, I don't know. I guess like when I started working, I stayed at my first studio that I worked at for 3 years, 3.5 years, something like that. And I got really burnt out to the point where I quit and I actually wanted to completely change careers. I call it my quarter life crisis. I enrolled in like a art curation program for some reason and I dropped out like 2 weeks later. But I would probably give myself the advice that it's all about kind of just doing stuff that you enjoy, learning how to combine both of the business side of things and also your personal creative goals. Just because it was really hard at first to kind of get used to the idea of just doing full time work and then not necessarily feeling creatively fulfilled. Another thing that I would really advise myself for is to kind of push for a fair wage in terms of salary, just because I don't know how this works for everyone else, but I find that personally, I definitely found I was paid much less than a lot of other people I worked with. And I remember having like a huge debate about how I was paid much less than my male employee that was doing the exact same role as myself. And I found that I had really little confidence of my abilities. So as a result, I accepted that low salary. And yeah, I would say to kind of be aware of how much you should be making in this industry, of what is fair, and kind of really not being afraid to talk about that and have a conversation with your employer, because that's only something that I've just started to learn. And when I hear of people who are younger in the industry, they're like, oh, I don't want to be too opportunistic. Like, I just kind of want to, I'm kind of grateful for whatever I can get, which I appreciate the sentiment behind. But in order to kind of keep the fairness of the industry like to like a high standard in terms of salary, you kind of have to push for what is fair.
Yeah, definitely. I think I've definitely had those experiences as well. And with time and probably getting a bit older, I think you learn to push more and, kind of question where you're going, what you're doing. Am I getting paid enough? Is someone else getting paid more than me for doing the same job? I mean, the problem is you don't always know what other people are getting paid, but I would really just advise people to go out and talk to other people. They don't have to be at your company or whatever, but see what the kind of going rates are if you're full time and especially freelance, and just try and push that a bit more and be confident in your abilities and work hard. But you have to be vocal about what you're doing in your job and what you're providing the company with your skills, and really tell them that when you have those opportunities in meetings and stuff about what you should be paid. You have to highlight all the things that you've been doing and how that's helping them to make money, essentially.
Absolutely. And I think also approaching with the attitude that these kind of conversations, they're always kind of going to be uncomfortable when you talk about salary or anything like that. But back in the day, I think I really thought of them as very personal conversations. Like, I would take them very personally. But I think the number one thing I've realized is, people are going to try and run a business. So a lot of the times they're going to try and pay for as little as possible in order to keep that business running. So you just kind of have to be the voice that pushes back and say, no, like, I need this amount of money for this amount of work, and that is fair. And so, yeah, I would definitely advise like kind of changing how you think about it and like pushing past the barrier of making it uncomfortable, because it's not uncomfortable, it's business. So you kind of both go in with a level head, I think is good.
Yeah, I think it's easier to do that in freelance sometimes because you're sort of registered most of the time as a company. So if you start thinking of yourself like a business, then things get less personal. And it's, not that everything is about making money, but you have to make enough money so that you can live, and being an artist doesn't have to be detrimental to, your finances, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree.
When you've worked freelance for people, have you charged normally on a project rate or a day rate?
So a lot of the freelance projects that I've gotten have been through an agency that I was represented by called the Drawing Book Studios in Sydney. So the benefit of that was that the fees that they would charge for a project were usually astronomically higher than I would do had the company approached me myself, just because I was kind of in that phase of being like, oh, I'm illustrating. Like, there's only so much that I can charge for this because it's essentially something I love and, it feels like a hobby. But because I was represented by this agency, they were coming from the business side of things. So they instantly understood things like copyright laws and usage and stuff like that. So they would charge very high amounts for, I guess, what is fair in the industry. And as a result, they would take a 25% cut of that. But I still always ended up getting quite a large amount of money than I would had the company approached me separately. But my understanding was that it was project-based rather than day rate.
Okay, yeah, because I think as an illustrator, obviously you have usage fees and things like that to consider, whereas most of the time, if you're working as a motion designer and animator, you usually have a day rate. But I think it is good sometimes to do things by project because then you're not getting charged for your time and you might have a bit more freedom if you're working remotely.
Yeah, definitely. I think working remotely, more likely I would charge by the project, like just kind of estimating the amount of time it would take me to complete it. And then also estimating in as part of that, the amount of feedback rounds you're going to give. Like I usually give 3 along the way. But if I am working on site, it's a set project. It has to be done in a certain amount of time, in which case I do charge a day rate. But if it's kind of like a project where they're like, hey, you kind of have to do this, and this is going to be the end result, and it's going to be seen in these different contexts and these different situations, I charge that based on, a project.
So if you're doing like a project fee, would you normally have a contract or something in place to say you're going to get 3 rounds of amends on this?
Yes. So I would usually just draw up like a really basic contract. And I also draw up a timeline just so that everybody's aware when the different stages of deliverables are due throughout the production pipeline. So for example, like in this timeline, I'll say, okay, first round will be pencil sketches. You pick one with revisions, and then I'll hash that out into a more refined pencil that you will approve. And then once that's approved, then I go into color and then maybe 2 rounds of feedback after that. And so that's all kind of outlined in the timeline so the client can know exactly when they're going to get certain deliverables and when their feedback is expected by, in order to keep everything like to date. That's if I'm running a project completely by myself. But that's also what my agency used to do. Like, I think it was very important to highlight those different stages, because if you get a bit vague about when things are due, then that's when kind of everything goes chaotic. And yeah, as part of the contract, that it would refer to the timeline.
Yeah, I think that's really important to, have these things in writing. And I think when people start out when they're a bit younger, maybe they kind of don't do that. And then, you get into these terrible situations where the client's expecting you to do amend after amend after amend on something. And, you need to be in a position where you can have it written down so you can charge extra when they go over a certain amount of amends.
Exactly. And I think it also just makes it so much easier when you're having that conversation to refer to, your past agreement and be like, look, like anything past this like round of feedback, I need to start charging you overtime because this isn't what was calculated in my original quote. And so that way it just helps get rid of like a lot of awkwardness and also miscommunication, I think, between you and the client.
Yeah, definitely. Do you have any other tips that you think would be helpful for the audience in terms of, how you run your projects and your business?
I guess like my number one tip is just like communicating along the way about a timeline. I guess that's because I like very much personally run on timelines. Like if someone is like, kind of get this to me whenever you can, like I'm not going to do it until I find it very hard to get focused and stay on track for a project. Whereas if there's like a set timeline, I have goals that I can work towards and I feel that everybody is on the same page. Another thing with advice that I would say is I really like to manage expectations about, work. So like when talking about a project, I like to give references to either my previous work or what I'm thinking for the project, just because a lot of the times I find, especially if you work in animation and you can kind of use After Effects, people kind of assume that you can do anything and it might not be at all suited to kind of your skill set. So just being honest with the client to manage expectations of what you can do, I think is very important. An example of this I've been given is, I've been approached to do like a 2D kind of animation with like in a 3D layer space, like, in After Effects with like all these intense camera moves and like story, like it's essentially like a moving storyboard. And that's kind of like not really at all what I'm good at. And, they'll give me like a 1 or 2 week deadline. And I kind of just have to have the understanding and wisdom to know that this is going to be a project from hell because it's not in my skill set. It's not in my interest. And I don't think I can pull it off. So I think being honest and managing expectations with clients is a really important thing.
Yeah, I think that's really important because if you feel like you're not the right person for the job, then maybe you shouldn't take that job. But when you first start, it's really hard to have that wisdom to do that because you're so kind of desperate to get any kind of work that you just think, yeah, I'm sure I can do it. Where I think there is a time and place for that. Like, obviously we need to push ourselves, but also I think sometimes it's okay to say, I'm not the right person for this job. And, generally you'll get a good response from that. If you're working as a freelancer and maybe you can recommend your friend who is the best person for that job. And this is kind of how things work. And I think the client would appreciate that much more and then maybe come back to you with a job that does suit your skill set rather than, you taking the job, it all going wrong and then they think that you're not capable. I think it's much better to manage their expectations, tell them exactly what you can do, and then do a great job, or maybe do a different job further down the line for them than kind of take any job which wouldn't really be suited to you and then kind of mess it up. And then, you kind of have burned that bridge a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. And like, I've definitely done that before. Like, I've learned that lesson by saying yes to things that I'm not good at. Like, for example, I'm not good at typography. Like, I can't do hand lettering. It's really, really amateur. But I've said yes to like major projects. And I've been there when the client is like really awkward and they're like, this isn't really what we wanted. And it's not because I'm not doing it right. It's because I'm just not good at it. And I also don't have any interest in it. So like you said, there is definitely a time and place. Like if people propose something and you kind of want to learn how to do that and you think that it would benefit you to kind of push yourself and learn and grow from this experience, for sure, go for it. But if a client approaches you with something that really isn't in your wheelhouse and you're not interested in it, definitely refer someone that could be really good with it.
I think, most of the time people get work because, other animators aren't free or they need help with their projects. So then you can go and kind of help them, which is great. I just think it's a really nice, friendly industry where people generally will pass work around as long as you're like a nice person and you obviously have the work to back it up as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, I really do enjoy being part of this like illustration and animation industry because that is the vibe that everybody gives. Like it is very like friendly. It isn't competitive. And if it is competitive, it's competitive in the nature that, oh, I see this person's doing really cool work. I too would like to do really cool work. And so you push yourself in that way to kind of reach those goals. Like, I don't think it's a very bitter or like sneaky industry where they're trying to like, push other people down. I think it's very open and friendly, which is great.
Yeah, I think if we all kind of, work together and especially on the business side of things, which is what this is about, to try and push everyone up, from the bottom and be kind of open about how we work and how we run our businesses and how this whole industry works. And I think it's a benefit for everybody because then people aren't kind of undercutting each other and things like that. Like, and the best people for the job are getting the job based on their style or whatever, I think that's really the way forward, and kind of teaching the newer, younger people who are coming into the industry how it works can only be a benefit really, because then they're charging what they should be or working with clients how they should be, and clients are more informed about how it works and how much work it takes to go into animation and illustration and stuff. I think it's, it builds up the whole ecosystem of the industry, and I think it can really help.
Yeah, absolutely. It keeps the whole industry healthy and, kind of stops burnout and it crumbling down, which is great.
Cool. Do you have any other tips or stories you want to share with the audience?
I guess my main takeaway just from my experience is, if you want to do a certain type of work, I think it's very important that you pursue that work in your own time if you can't pursue it in your kind of full-time career. So, if you want to do like a short animation, I think you should take the steps to do that on the side, just because it's very hard for clients to kind of take you on and go on the faith that you can pull something off if there's no proof that you've done it before. So, if you really love animating like cute little icons, like just do a personal project where you show that you can do that and you can pull it off, because it's a really good way as well to keep up morale creatively and just kind of work alongside getting money and sustaining a business, but also growing in the way that you want to creatively.
Yeah, I think that's so true. If the audience wants to contact you or find your work, where should they go?
They can find my work on my website at irenefeleo.com, and my Instagram handle is just irenefeleo.
Cool, thanks. We'll put that in the show notes as well. Thanks so much for coming on the show. I think you shared some really great tips.
No worries. Thanks so much for having me.
That was really cool. Thanks so much to Irene for coming on the show. If you want to see Irene's work or anything we've talked about on this show or previous ones, you can go to motionhatch.com and click on the podcast section. And there you can see all of the episodes that we've released so far with the show notes. So you have all the links to everyone's work. Also, if you want to sign up for our newsletter, I can add you to our free Facebook community where there's lots of animators talking about the business side of motion design and animation. If you could do me one last favor and head over to iTunes and leave us a rating and review and subscribe, that just helps get the Motion Hatch podcast out there. See you soon.